So what happened in June of 2010, I was commanding in Afghanistan. I'd been there a year, but I'd been in the wars after 9/11 for 6 of the previous 7 years I'd been deployed in combat. So I'm completely focused on what I'm doing. And this story comes out in Rolling Stone magazine with the title of The Runaway General. And whenever you get a title like that, that's not good. And there had been tension between the Defense Department and the new Obama administration, not personally between me and the president or anything like that, but tensions that most new administrations can feel. And so there was also frustration with the war in Afghanistan. So a number of these, forces are building up. And so when this news story comes out that basically says that the military isn't as respectful of President Obama or Vice President Biden or his team as we should be, that is really a pressure on the president. And it explodes on his desk. And I fly back to the United States knowing that this is creating a small but significant firestorm. And I fly back all night to get there and go into the Oval Office. And I've carried my resignation already typed up. And I go into the president and we have a short meeting and he asked me what happened. It was very professional and very, friendly. We'd always had a good relationship. And I said, listen, I don't know what happened, but I don't think it reflects my team. But here's my resignation, because if you want to accept that, I'm fine with it. If you want to tell me to go back in command, I'm fine with that too, whatever you think's best for the mission. And he accepted the resignation. And we talked for just a few minutes after that, and then I walked out. And as I walked out, you go back to a little holding room where my assistant was waiting. And when you get in that room, you suddenly realize what has changed. Up until a couple minutes before, I'd been a commander, I'd been a general, I'd been a soldier all my life. And suddenly, I'm none of those things. And for at least the next couple of days, I'm on the media in the U.S., a disgraced general every 2 minutes on the ticker at the bottom. Now, blessedly, that cycle's pretty short in the United States as people move on to other things. But my 86-year-old retired general father is down in Tennessee and he's watching this. My son is down in Florida finishing college. He's watching this. All the people that I care about are watching this. And it wasn't that I know that they felt for me, but I also felt for them. There's an embarrassment. There's a shock. And then all the people in Afghanistan that were working with me, many had come to Afghanistan because I'd asked them to. And they had left their families and come forward, and suddenly I'm gone. So all of those feelings, you feel like you're letting people down. You feel like you failed really for the first time in life. I mean, there are a lot of smaller failures, but this is the first huge failure that I had really known. And I drive across the city. My wife was living in Army quarters at Fort McNair, which is the other side of Washington, D.C. And I get there, and remember, I'd flown all night, so she knew I was doing that, and she knew I was going to see the president. But as I walk into the house, she's standing in the entryway. And I looked at her and I said, it's over. The president accepted my resignation, so I'm out. We're out. And Annie looked at me and she goes, good. We've always been happy and we'll always be happy. And I was sort of stunned in the moment, but I was stunned in a way that sort of admiration for her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't going, no, you got a bad deal. That was unfair. We're the aggrieved party. She didn't do that at all. She said, okay, we'll move on. Now, I'm sure that inside, this little girl that I'd loved my whole life, and I still do, I know she was certainly going through a lot, but she didn't show a bit of it. She just said, this is the way we're going. And I joke with people that Annie lives life like she drives, with no use for the rearview mirror. And so what it does is it created this dynamic where, for me, we weren't going to go back and relitigate the past. And one of the things I learned about that, there's no point. Nobody cares It happens to you and they may sympathize, but they got their own lives. So people aren't worried about whether it was fair or right. The article was accurate, and that we would move on. And so I was 55, about to turn 56. I had planned to stay in the Army for 2 more years in Afghanistan and then retire. And in some ways, it was the worst day of my life, easily. In some ways, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because several things. First, I left the Army with an energy. I wanted to prove to myself, and I think to other people too, that I wasn't a failure. And so I looked at new things. I started teaching. I started a business, a number of other things. So I think that was part of the energy to do that. And then it caused me to reflect, because suddenly, if I wasn't a soldier, okay, who was I? And maybe you start to do that when you get older anyway, because you have a little more time and wisdom. But I started doing that in a very serious way. And I always had loved to read, but I read more philosophy and things that I had been exposed to, but never paid real attention to. And I started thinking more. And so that started for me a journey that I think has been helpful. It hasn't given me all these answers, but it's helped me identify a lot of the questions, which I then can reach my own decision on.